Hey, you geeks! I'd like to begin by clarifying a mistake I made last video. It provides the perfect case study on perception and misinterpretation. I complained this elf was resting an arrow on his wrist, when in fact it was a sword. I watched the episode thrice, not to mention the considerable amount of time I stared at the screenshot during editing, and never caught that until it was pointed out to me by one of you lovely viewers. Goes to show that how we first view a thing is often how we always perceive it, even if that first impression was wrong. So I own my mistake, and my mistaken annoyance here, in the hopes that it will inspire others in this fandom to do likewise.
Between all the bleeding and fighting, I've been reading and writing.
Episode 3, Adar, was enjoyable. Nothing spectacular, but it had a collection of little moments which made me squee with joy. I will now thoroughly spoil this series for you and The Lord of the Rings by talking about its characters, world building, and plot. Fun! Halbrand is totally Sauron. He has all the rugged smith hotness that Celebrimbor lacks.
I'm telling you, there is not another man on this isle that knows this craft better than I.
And there's this line.
Look at the mouth on him.
I almost spewed my coffee in laughter thinking about it. The only question that remains for me is if he is sincerely trying to be good and is just really bad at it.
F is for fire that burns down the whole town.
Or is he trying to infiltrate the highest circles of elves and human society to corrupt them, but he's also really bad at that too? Master manipulators don't usually end up in jail unless they want to be there.
And the armor that ought to rest upon your shoulders weighs upon your soul.
Maybe he was trying to bring Galadriel back, but if she was left on a boat, she'd be long gone. And she did the research on his crest without knowing he was in trouble.
I found this in the Hall of Law.
I now see that there isn't supposed to be anything on top of the wingy thingy. Halbrand, as far as I can tell, is completely honest with her.
That's funny. I found this on a dead man.
Though in a way she does not expect. I'm totally fine with Sauron fooling Galadriel with his sincerity. However, many deep lore fans are scandalized because of a cherry-picked line from the Unfinished Tales. In Eregion, Sauron posed as an emissary of the Valar. He perceived at once that Galadriel would be his chief adversary and obstacle. They ignore that Galadriel being onto Sauron the whole time creates problems, which the full quote by Christopher acknowledges. In Eregion, Sauron posed as an emissary of the Valar, sent by them to Middle-earth, thus anticipating the Istari. He perceived at once that Galadriel would be his chief adversary and obstacle, and he endeavored therefore to placate her, bearing her scorn with outward patience and courtesy. No explanation is offered in this rapid outline of why Galadriel scorned Sauron, unless she saw through his disguise, or of why, if she did perceive his true nature, she permitted him to remain in Eregion.
As the good book says, if you spit in the air, it lands in your face.
This chapter also reinforces that Sauron appeared at this time to be fair, but it never technically says that Sauron appeared as an elf. The fandom's conclusion these past decades that Sauron appeared as an elf was a safe assumption based on the elves as the fairest folk. Though Istari, who Sauron was impersonating, appear as men, so it's plausible that Sauron could appear as a man as well. I realize this weakens my argument that the stranger is Gandalf, so let's talk about levels of canon. In the Unfinished Tales of Galadriel and Celeborn, Tolkien contradicts himself. So what even is the canon against which we are supposed to judge this show? My view is that the show, by contract and copyright, has been given a deposit of canon, consisting of The Lord of the Rings, its appendices, and a smattering of the Silmarillion from the Tolkien estate. They clearly do not have rights to the unfinished tales, so that in this analogy is private revelation. Private revelation that is widely known, but not essential to understanding the heart of Tolkien. Thus, I don't mind if the show takes artistic liberty with the deposit of canon, even if it seemingly contradicts the private revelation of the unfinished tales. Technically, we haven't seen Halbrand in Eregion yet, so we don't know how Galadriel treats him there. Besides, it helps when I buy the sexual tension between Galadriel and Halbrand. If it had come off as strained as her smile on horseback, we would be having a different conversation. Queen Regent. I am so glad her father still lives. I guess that Numenor uses a different titling system than the British monarchy. Under that system, a queen regent would imply that she has no right to rule in her own name. With her father still alive, they keep the essential element of Numenorian culture. We're also creating political intrigue around the end of Tar Palantir and the reign of Tar Miriel. Miriel usurping her father's throne because he was too fond of elves makes her seem more sympathetic to the anti-elf faction of Numenor.
He was loyal to the elves.
Is loyal. We forced him from the throne for it.
This would appear to contradict her story in the appendices, which paints her as a faithful. On the one hand, she seems to scoff at the Eldar and the faithful.
Though elves have been unwelcome on our shores since the reign of my grandfather's great-grandfather, you chose to break with that precedent.
But she also gives Elendil an opportunity to have quality time with Galadriel.
You brought in an elf, so Miriel promoted you.
Nor does she seem to mind that Galadriel is making very light of Pharazôn's restricting her to the palace. The game is afoot in Numenor, and Miriel is playing it very, very well. The Faithful. Ever since the first posters depicted Isildur's hands as those of a sailor and not a lordling, I've had time to adjust to the idea that, yes, contrary to the appendices, Elendil's house is not going to be the current advisors to the monarchy. And the show addresses this change in one line.
Originally of a noble line, now a sea guardsman.
Succinct and meaningful, just how I like my dialogue. It is more believable that members of an unpopular sect would be driven out of the halls of power, while also making the great Isildur and Elendil far more empathetic than the stone kings we see in the Fellowship. Yet the queen has her eye on Elendil.
In my experience, it is unwise to live one's life guessing after signs and portents.
For his part, Elendil is clearly struggled between his faithful roots on the western shores of Numenor and maintaining the respected position he has attained in the Sea Guard.
And do you think it was easy convincing the sailmaster you were up to the task?
An inner turmoil that has delightfully spilled into family drama.
The watery part of this world has a way of healing even the deepest of wounds. The way it's healed yours.
Giving Anarion's absence a solid footing in the plot.
Anarion told me you deferred twice.
Anarion? What's your brother have to do with this?
All these details please me greatly, and I'm excited to see where the show goes with this completely lovable and noble house. Walk Alone. And now we're getting into the charming consequences of country living. The Harfoots sound so endearing with their chant.
Nobody goes unpaid. Come on. And nobody walks alone.
Isn't that a Celtic woman's song? Yes, it is. Anywho, we see the logical inverse of that reasoning, that if you go off the trail, you will walk alone.
Any Harfoot that breaks them is to be decaravaned.
By befriending a giant, Nori has gone off the path, so it is fitting that she face the consequences. Though this episode doesn't give new fodder to the whole who is the stranger debate, though they acknowledge it.
He's a giant with a brackish temper who sometimes murders fireflies.
Whoever he is, I see he is competing with Blovo Bolgebuk for the Darwin Awards. Are we supposed to believe that a being who can control fire doesn't know that flame burns things? Even if his fire was cold, that's still a stretch. I highly doubt Sauron would ever be so naive. But naivete is something that could fit on Gandalf. Gandalf the Brown, that is. The appendices say that Gandalf the Grey arrives via ship during the Third Age, and my true-to-Tolkien sensibilities really just wants the whole Harfoot storyline to be happening at the beginning of the Third Age. However, there's a lot of deep lore folk who seem to be okay with the Meteor Man as one of the Blue Wizards, who in Tolkien's The Peoples of Middle-earth came first, contrary to the appendices. Tolkien acknowledged that they must have had great influence on the history of the Second and Third Age. I interpret this private revelation to mean that Tolkien could conceive of a wizard being around in the Second Age.
Inconceivable! You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
So, just as Glorfindel was replaced by Arwen in the Fellowship movie, what is wrong with replacing a practically unknown blue wizard with a known eventual gray wizard? As for his color, in The Lord of the Rings, we see Gandalf move up in the ranks from gray to white by dying and coming back. What if the Rings of Power tells us how Gandalf the Brown dies and gets promoted to Gandalf the Grey? I'm equal parts intrigued and repulsed by the possibility of making wizard promotion a reoccurring event, but I think it could be done without upsetting the deeper themes of Tolkien. We shall see how it goes. The Pit. Broadly speaking, there are two types of character flaws. There are the flaws that the writers create for the characters. These are flaws they draw attention to and probably have some narrative payoff. For example, Galadriel's anger issues. I hope.
I have a daughter who runs fast and a son who runs blind. Your eyes bear a striking resemblance to both.
Arondir doesn't seem to have any of these. His decision to go out to see Bronwyn, then investigate Horden, and jump down into a horror pit alone.
You don't know what's down there.
That is the reason I must go.
Are all painted as heroic actions. Arondir is possibly too brave for his own good. The flaw I see of his apparent stupidity is not something the writers, I think, meant to portray. Once we see the elves down in the orc pit, they give us some explanation for why the elves' constant vigilance for the last century or so utterly failed.
This must be how they escaped our detection, and how they shield themselves from sunlight.
I'm still left with the impression that the Sylvan elves just weren't very good at their jobs. Worse, upon watching this episode with friends, most of them couldn't recognize Arondir's guard mates greeting him in the pit. They mistake their reunion for sexual tension. Thus, the emotional impact of the elf guard's death on the audience is minimal, like Haldir's death in the Two Towers. We have spontaneous time dilations, and our main character is freaking out, all to highlight the death of a practical stranger.
Who are you? Excuse me? I think the question is, who are you?
Putting all that aside, I could empathize with Arondir even though he isn't saying much. Also, his crazy elf ranger skills are just the right level of implausible that I can appreciate them rather than call BS. It was great to see the orcs fear sunlight. having the elves refuse to cut down the tree.
This tree sprang from the earth long before you crawled from whatever wretched place you grew.
Make an escape attempt was all wonderful. However, that warg didn't look great. That's the kind of error that takes me out of the story. All in all, Arondir is practically carrying his debacle of a storyline all on his own. And as a reward, he gets to meet Adar.
Oh, goody.
Collision course. This is really the first episode where I felt myself sinking in and just enjoying the show. I still don't care about Galadriel's quest that she's shoving down everyone's throat.
I must be blind. This is no sigil.
But I do care if she will get seduced by Sauron. I don't think she will, but I want to see it play out. I want to know what secrets the Queen is hiding. We know that Numenor will ride to war, so how will she get her people to go from unwilling to spare a ship?
It's been generations since a ship of Numenor was permitted to make such a journey on an elf's behalf.
To launching an invasion. I'm guessing that she will convince Pharazôn that this is an opportunity for imperial conquest. We already see their national superiority at play.
You're on a lucky streak, Lowman. Free sail to our island, eating our food, drinking our ale. What will you take next?
So the Southlanders are really up a creek.
Congratulations. You are being rescued. Please do not resist.
Speaking of, I do care if Arondir will see Bronwyn again. The elf deserves a break. Though if the orcs are searching for a weapon...
They're searching for something. Some sort of weapon, perhaps.
Not sure how the captives know that, but 3 guesses as to what the orcs are looking for. So the question isn't if they will meet again, it's whether they will meet as captive or free. Lastly, my reading buddy has convinced me that the Harfoots are descending from the Emyn into the grasslands, which will soon be home to the Dead Marshes.
A great battle long ago.
Thus, they are drawing nearer to the plot, though I have no idea where the stars are. As we approach the midpoint, I hope we see these courses begin to collide, wherein sparks will fly and hopefully identities will be revealed. Thank you for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe if you would like to see more. Your patronage is greatly appreciated.